Hi, friends. I was riding around on my motorcycle today, and I decided that the time has really come for me to talk to you about war, and in particular, the war that's been consuming the headlines over the last few weeks, the war between Israel, Iran, and the United States, but also how this war is going to spill out into a bigger war. So the war is not over. The war is right now in a reload stage. So this is going to be useful to you because it's going to enable you to understand how to compare the remote viewing sessions that we have done at Farsight in our deep news projects with the actual history that you are going to see unravel the history of this war. Not just the past history, but what will be the future of the war. So let's begin with the basic idea of how war is fought, because the normal way that most people think of how war is fought is not the way it actually is fought. So in the old days, like World War II, as well as during the Iraq War, when the United States and others invaded Iraq, those were conventional armies, and those attacks were over desert land, flat desert land, and there was an area for staging in Kuwait. So the war with Iran is very different. So the real question is, I heard some people talking on the Bill Maher show just the other day about boots on the ground, actually landing American troops on the ground and searching for those nuclear weapons, the nuclear material, the stuff that apparently was not destroyed during the bombings. And you're talking about the possibility of invading Iran by foot. And when I heard those people, intelligent people, one congressman and the other a news person, talking about it, I said, are they idiots? I mean, what? And so I really thought if they could be saying things that stupid, then I think it's time for me to talk about that, because that's going to be how you're going to understand our remote viewing subjects dealing with the war actually should be understood. It's one of the most consequential hypothetical military operations in the 21st century, how to invade Iran. So this is a strategic breakdown of whether the United States ground invasion of Iran, beginning with aerial assaults and amphibious landings, could possibly succeed. Now, what I'd like you to say is, do not side with one side or the other. Do not say that the Israeli side and the U.S. side is correct and the Iranian side is incorrect. And do not say that the Iranian side is correct and the U.S. and Israeli side is incorrect. Put that all aside. That whole thing about who's good and who's bad gets everybody confused, and you can't sort anything out. So what I really want you to do is just to think strategically. Don't think about the good guys and the bad guys. Just think about what's going on in the heads of the combatants. The only serious mistake, really serious mistake, that you could make is to think that either the U.S., the Israelis, or the Iranians are stupid. To think that any one of those three are stupid is stupid. That is not the case. The Israelis know what they're doing, the U.S. knows what it's doing, and the Iranians know what they're doing. And they're all playing a very strategic game, and I'm going to go through what that is so that you can see what is most likely going to be spilling out, and that will hopefully enable you to understand the remote viewing results. Now, we are going to be putting out something really soon, like in a week, that will enable you to deal with our huge library of remote viewing stuff on the mysteries level, and then a little bit after that for the deep news level. It's going to be a what we call the Farsight Vault. And what it is, it's a single file. It's in text format, and you're going to be able to download it for free. And it is literally a complete compilation of every word that was ever spoken in all of the Farsight projects. And what that is going to be used for, it's specially designed to be read by AI. So you're going to be able to take that file and upload it to ChatGPT or Grok or whichever one you're working with, and that AI will be able to read it, and then you can use prompts, regular prompts with your AI to ask it questions about things that are inside those projects. Think of it as a type of Wikipedia, but on a galactic level, and much broader and not nearly as biased as you get in some of the online forms. Like Wikipedia is basically a contributor-based encyclopedia, and all types of biases show up in it. Controversial topics in particular have a very difficult time of getting anything straight. And so you have a problem here in that people with their own perspectives write things in Wikipedia, and you have no control over that. But all of the data in Farsight projects were conducted under scientifically defensible conditions. They were conducted under totally blind conditions, so they're all objective perceptions. And you are going to be able to use prompts, the way people like to use prompts, to ask any question about the solar system, the planet, the galaxy, based on those remote viewing data, and your AI will give you the answers for that based on that. And it's an unprecedented level of capability that you're going to be having. Well, when we publish the Deep News version of that as well, which will be soon after, you're going to be able to ask anything related to our Deep News projects regarding world events. And that is going to be a total game changer, using prompts to say, what do you think about XYZ, but get the answers back based on the remote viewing data. And then your AIs will be able to recommend to you which Deep News is to watch, so you can see the actual data, the sketches, the pictures, the graphics, and the mystery stuff. You'll be able to know which mysteries movie you want to look at with respect to any particular question you're asking. So it gives you a real interactive capability with the entire Farsight library. And so all those people who are subscribers to farsightprime.com will really be able to totally utilize the entire video library interactively like they've never had been possible before. And that's coming like really soon. So that's something we've been working on nonstop. It's a huge project. It's a huge data set. It's a huge project, and so that's really coming. So with regard to this war stuff with Iran, you want to be able to say, how could this remote viewing stuff be actually possible? So let's talk about the whole idea of whether an invasion of Iran is actually possible. There's a short answer. Technically, it's possible. But strategically, it's absolutely catastrophic. So I don't think it's going to happen, but if it does happen, it'll be catastrophic. But technically, it is possible. So the success in military terms, such as seizing territory and toppling the regime, is possible, but it would have enormous costs, but also political, economic, and military blowback that would make it what you might call a Pyrrhic victory or worse. Now, what is a Pyrrhic victory? From Wikipedia, a Pyrrhic victory is a victory that inflicts such devastating toll on the victor that it's tantamount to a defeat, and such a victory negates any true sense of achievement or damages long-term progress. So the phrase originates from a quote from Pyrrhus of Epirus, whose triumph against the Romans in the Battle of Asculum in 279 BC destroyed much of his forces, forcing the end of his campaign. So he won the battle, but it was the end of his campaign. His forces were destroyed. So if we have a situation where the United States invaded with Israel Iran, tactically it could be done with enormous cost, but it would be a Pyrrhic victory in the sense that it would be so devastating to the United States it's hard to think of it as a real victory. So let's talk about the constraints that such an invasion would happen, the so-called boots on the ground idea with respect to Iran. And again, the people that raise it are thinking we need to go in there and find those weapons of mass destruction, those nuclear weapons and that nuclear material and clear it all out. Okay. Well, first of all, let's talk about the terrain of Iran, the geography. Iran is mountainous, very different from Iraq, which was flat and desert. Iran is mountainous, especially along its western and northern borders. Now, amphibious landings on its southern coast near the Persian Gulf are possible, but they lead to vast deserts and hard-to-defend corridors. Now, the Zagros Mountains form a natural defense wall running parallel to any likely U.S. invasion axis that would come from the south. Now, unlike Iraq, Iran has no wide open western deserts with easy tank corridors, and any invasion would be slow, grinding, and vulnerable to ambush. All right, now let's talk about the size of Iran as compared with like Iraq, which is relatively smaller. Iran has like 20 million people. That's triple Iraq's 2003 population. So you're talking lots of people. And millions of those people are organized under the IRGC and the Basij militia system. Now, you can expect mass mobilization in what military people would call an asymmetric defense. Now, asymmetric warfare is very different from what you normally consider with regard to what happened in the Iraq campaign and World War II. We have conventional forces sort of facing off with each other. Asymmetric defense means one side is sort of conventional and the other side is very unconventional. Guerrilla warfare is one type of asymmetric defense, but with Iran you'd get a whole mixture of different types. But think of asymmetric defense as one side being conventional and the other side being totally diverse, dispersed, and unconventional. This asymmetric defense, which would have mass mobilization in Iran, would have domestic urban combat. Now, the Iranian cities are already militarized, and they are prepared for siege. Tehran's metro has bunkers in it. Now, let's talk about the amphibious landing to begin with. The feasibility of that with regard to the U.S. Navy and Marines. They're capable of amphibious assault, but Iran has mined key ports, meaning their ports are mined, and the so-called littorals in the Persian Gulf. So there's a lot of stuff they'd have to get around, the stuff that's mined. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is easily closed by the Iranian defenses and would become an economic choke point immediately. Any landing near Bandar Abbas or Bushehr would need to overcome naval mines, then fast boat swarms. They have lots of fast boats, these small fast boats, swarms of them, and coastal missile batteries. Now, let's talk about Iranian defenses and their doctrine. The Iranian military doctrine is what we'd call a layered defense that integrated air defense systems that include Russian-made S-300s, mobile systems, and large numbers of radar decoys. They also have ballistic and cruise missiles like the Fateh 110 and the Sumar, and they can strike regional bases and carriers. Now, let's talk about the asymmetry of the actions. On Iran's side, part of the asymmetry is proxy activation. You see, when most people think of wars, they think of two sides facing off. But Iran very rarely fights anybody with their own military. Their strategy is to fight with proxies. So Iran has been fighting a war, a long-term war with Israel for a very long time. because Israel's been fighting the Houthi rebels, Hamas, Hezbollah, and until recently, Syria, because Syria was acting as a channel for all of the Iranian military supplies that were coming in. So Iran was supplying all of these people, all of these groups, and training all of these groups, and funding all of these groups, with the understanding that the groups would attack Israel. If Iran was not supplying information, strategies, education, money, weapons to the Houthi rebels, Hamas, Hezbollah, and so on, then all those organizations just simply wouldn't have been effective. They would not have maybe even existed. They just wouldn't have done anything. But they're proxies. So even though they're technically not Iran attacking Israel, they are Iran attacking Israel. So that's what you have to understand, that Iran would activate proxy warfare if the United States and Israel attacked and tried to capture actually Iran. And that would happen immediately. They would immediately activate Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shia militias in Iraq, and trust me, they have zillions of sleeper cells globally, including inside the United States. So this type of proxy asymmetric warfare would be immediately activated, and that would take American attention away from their fight with Iran to these other battles. And then there would be terrorism. And as part of the asymmetric warfare, there would be terrorism, cyber attacks, naval sabotage, and hostage scenarios, and that would escalate worldwide. Iran's doctrine, military doctrine, favors delay. Inflict attrition and wait for political collapse of the invader, not battlefield victory. So Iran doesn't think of battlefield victory in a hand-to-hand combat type of thing as something they are expecting or wanting. They're always thinking in terms of attritional delay, something that wears the enemy down, and then eventually the enemy collapses. So let's look at the U.S. capabilities. Since we've looked at what Iran can do, let's look at what the U.S. can do. Clearly, the U.S. has aerial superiority, and the U.S. would likely achieve air dominance quickly using stealth assets such as the F-35 and the B-2, jamming and cruise missiles. However, it's noteworthy that Iran's defense minister just went to China and is trying to buy the latest Chinese jets, fighter jets. And those jets proved very effective in the Pakistani-Indian conflict of just a couple months ago. So those jets were extremely cutting edge. They're equal to a lot of the stuff that are in the best armories of the West. So it's China. I mean, China could supply these things to Iran. Now, Iran has orders in for advanced jets from Russia, but Russia's been very slow in delivering these things. So Iran doesn't want to wait. So they want to buy them from China. So we have a situation where the United States could actually dominate immediately with air superiority, but if they wait much longer, Iran may have their own capabilities with regard to aircraft. Now, during the last Iran-Israeli stuff, Israel used jets a lot to bomb Iran. Iran was responding with missiles, but the jets have the ability of being able to fly over Iran and pick targets. So that's now the Israelis did lose a couple of jets, but the Iranians don't want to have that type of air superiority with Israel. Again, they want to be able to combat in like dogfights, so that when the Israeli jets come, the Iranian jets can go up. So anyway, the current air superiority with American forces, the B-2s, the F-35s, right now they would completely dominate the air. But a year from now, it's unclear. Now, there is key Iranian infrastructure that could be destroyed by the air in days. For example, there is nuclear sites, command and control sites, as well as air bases. So the air superiority could work for that purpose to do that much. Now, the other thing is that the United States has special operations and U.S. cyber forces that could be crippling to the Iranian communications and logistics early on. However, the Iranians themselves are very good with cyber warfare. So if the United States disabled a lot of the cyber capability of Iran in the country, you still have to think that Iranian capabilities could disrupt or disable a great deal of cyber stuff outside of Iran, sort of in Western Europe and United States and so on. So you also have to think about assassination of commanding figures, targeting the IRGC Quds force, for example, raiding missile launchers and things like that. So the United States could do stuff like that. Now let's talk about conventional ground forces. Now, to hold territory, the United States would need at least 500,000 troops, likely more than the 2003 Iraqi invasion. Now, the Iraqi invasion used only 160,000 troops, and that still failed to hold. So for an Iranian invasion, a U.S. invasion of Iran, you're talking an absolute minimum of 500,000 troops, and that may not even be enough. And there's no staging base equivalent to Kuwait, Iraq, and Turkey. They would likely deny the use of their territory, and the Gulf states would hesitate to assist overtly. All right, now let's talk about the political and strategic fallout. Okay, an invasion of Iran wouldn't just be unnoticed in the rest of the world. First and foremost, global oil prices would spike. It would be amazing. It would be like really a big spike. The Strait of Hormuz handles approximately 20% of the global oil transit. Now, China and Russia would likely aid Iran diplomatically and covertly, if not militarily. Now, an occupation of Iran would ignite a regional Shia insurgency across Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, and Bahrain. All right, now let's talk about inside the United States. The United States public has a very low tolerance for sustained high-casualty occupations. So political will would collapse quickly unless provoked by a massive national trauma. Think 9/11, Pearl Harbor, things like that. So the final assessment would be that Iran has certain advantages and the United States has certain advantages, but the most important difference is the asymmetric nature of the battle. So you'd have to have a massive buildup of the United States military strength, and you'd have to be able to defend against attacks in the United States with respect to the public opinion, and it would be a very difficult thing to keep that level of motivation going in the United States. Okay, so this runs the problem of isolating the United States and have Iran being perceived worldwide as the victim. And so that type of narrative produces an almost unimaginable potential for insurgency. So the U.S. could succeed militarily in toppling the Iranian regime and establishing ground control through the amphibious and ground invasion. Yes, it could be done, but the cost of doing it would be enormous. And strategically, worldwide, it would be a total disaster. And domestically within the United States, it would also be a disaster. Iran is not Iraq or Afghanistan. And remember how hard Afghanistan was. Iran is larger, it's more unified in its defense, and more prepared for an asymmetric war. So the United States might break the state, but it would not be able to replace it with anything stable, and that's something that the United States has to be concerned with. Meaning, if the United States did destroy the state of Iran, such as in the sense that the government collapsed, then you would likely have a situation very similar to post-Iraq, Libya, any type of country in that region that has a government collapse, as bad as the government may be, or whatever, it's, you get chaos afterward. And the war would radicalize the region, cripple the economy, and entangle America in what could only be described as a generational conflict. Okay, now let's talk about the possibility of what would happen inside the United States. So, if the U.S. is going to invade Iran from the Gulf, we want to ask, how could it even possibly succeed? It's a mental model that people want to know about. So, this type of thing, you want to say, is there anything in our remote viewing projects that suggest what would happen domestically within the United States? So, if there is an invasion of Iran, if that type of conflict does arrive, the Farsight data suggests that it would be a asymmetric form. There would be drone warfare, proxy militias, cyber attacks, strategic strikes, and non-conventional alliances. And so what we're seeing in a lot of these transcripts reflect the emergence of a different type of warfare, not the outdated playbook of the early 2000s and even the World War II type stuff. So if a war between the United States and Iran breaks out, especially following an initial air or drone strike campaign, it would almost certainly evolve as an asymmetrical conflict. Here's how it would likely unfold. And this is going to be important because this you're going to be able to look directly at our remote viewing results and say, oh gosh, that's sort of what we're seeing, all right? So the likely asymmetric outline of a U.S.-Iranian war would have an initial phase. First, there would be strategic U.S. air and missile strikes. There would be attacks on the nuclear infrastructure, the missile sites, the air defense systems, the IRGC command nodes, okay? And the means would be with stealth bombers, Tomahawk cruise missiles from submarines and surface ships, satellite-guided munitions, cyber attacks. The objective would be to cripple Iran's high-valued military capabilities without deploying the ground forces. That would last about 2 weeks of intensive targeting. Iranian responses would be to fire short and medium-range missiles at the United States bases in Iraq, Syria, UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. So, launching of cyber attacks on the U.S. infrastructure should be totally expected. We would have to prepare for strategic retaliation using regional proxies. Now, that's all phase one. Then phase two. The Iranian proxy mobilization would really gear up, and the primary axis would be in Lebanon, Hezbollah, Iraq, the PMF groups, in Syria, the IRGC aligned forces, and in Yemen, the Houthi rebels. Now, the goal would be to saturate the U.S. and allied positions with missile and drone attacks. Now, let's talk about the tactics. Hezbollah fires precision-guided rockets at Israel, dragging them into conflict. The Houthi drones attack Saudi and Emirati energy infrastructure. The militias in Iraq attack U.S. military bases using rocket, artillery, and mobile IRAM systems. Now, this phase becomes a multi-front guerrilla campaign, not a traditional war. Then we go to phase three, which is regional maritime disruption. Iran would activate its naval strategy in the Persian Gulf. It would deploy fast attack craft and suicide drones against oil tankers. Mines the Strait of Hormuz would be driving up the global oil prices because of that mining, and this would trigger global energy panic and financial stress. Now, the goal would be economic retaliation via global instability without matching U.S. power head on. Then we go to phase 4. There would be a global cyber and terror disruption with Iranian cyber units, and such of those units are called like APT-3030 and APT-35. I'm sorry, APT-33 and APT-35. And they would launch ransomware attacks against critical infrastructure in the United States. There would be attacks on financial systems, energy grids, port logistics. Then we'd have Iran-aligned sleeper cells or sympathetic groups might attempt to have localized terror attacks against soft targets abroad. Uncertain, but it's plausible under this type of escalation. And then in phase 5, we'd have internal collapse. Regime defenses. If the U.S. strikes are effective and persistent, you'd get, regime could fracture. The Iranian regime could fracture politically under economic collapse and civilian unrest. But then the regime focuses on internal survival, suppressing the uprising and keeping control over Tehran. Now, the U.S. planners will be wary of triggering a full collapse due to the power vacuum risk, and that was seen with the post-Saddam and post-Gaddafi situations in Iraq and Libya. So let's go over the strategic summary of Iran's. You'd have Iran's asymmetric approach of proxy forces, land proxy forces, sabotage, insurgency, air drones, limited missiles, decoys, sea swarm boats. These are small boats that swarm out, and then they're well armed, but they swarm out. Mines, tanker disruption, cyber infrastructure attacks, psychological ops, political leverage, global anti-U.S. sentiment building, and the media would portray the U.S. as the aggressor, and it would definitely rally the Islamic world. So, there would be no victory parade. The U.S. can cripple Iran militarily, that's for sure, it can do that, but it cannot control the region afterwards. Iran will not fight to win conventionally. It's not going to try to bash and beat the United States. It will fight to survive and to punish through disruption, delay, and regional chaos. A long conflict benefits Tehran strategically. This is a war of attrition and perception, not tanks and terrain. Now, I have to add that some intelligence assets in the United States think that Iran has a sizable number of sleeper cells in the U.S. They are likely armed with missiles capable of significant damage. Such weapons were likely brought into the United States during the open border period of the Biden-Harris administration. So the continental United States would experience warfare as well. The U.S. would crack down heavily with martial law, leading to possible civil disruptions that could threaten the stability of the government. So, if Iran has pre-positioned covert strike cells inside the United States, equipped with short-range missile systems, possibly man-pads, loitering munitions, or even smuggled guided munitions of limited range, then we're not talking about a foreign war anymore. We're talking about a multi-domain, two-front conflict that brings battlefield conditions to the United States mainland for the first time since the Civil War. Well, let's do a revised strategic picture with domestic sleeper cells. This is a key escalation risk if sleeper cells are activated. The targets would include power grids, this is all within the United States, refineries, bridges, transport hubs, and urban symbols like government buildings and cultural centers. Even a few successful attacks, just a few successful attacks, would force rapid national lockdowns. The expected response would be from the United States government martial law declared in targeted metro zones. There would be mass surveillance intensification and door-to-door sweeps, especially in immigrant-heavy areas. Supply chains would be disrupted. Internet restrictions would be possible. False flag possibilities would skyrocket. Political actors may try to weaponize the chaos. Social trust would collapse, triggering domestic unrest, especially in the blue-red ideological fault lines. The cognitive result would be Americans would begin to see their own homeland as a battlefield, emotionally similar to Israelis under rocket fire, but culturally unprecedented in the United States. The federal government's grip on legitimacy would be tested, and in some scenarios, state governors would defy federal control, accelerating fragmentation. The connection to remote viewing Farsight sessions that allude to urban collapse, emergency governance, sudden social paralysis in the United States, the presence of a foreign hand within U.S. borders. Now, all that fits within a coherent war map only if sleeper cell activation is real. So, the final strategic insight, if such sleeper capabilities do exist, and some intel insiders believe that they do, then Iran does not need to defeat the U.S. militarily. All it needs to do is to force the U.S. into strategic overreaction, triggering internal division, loss of global prestige, economic self-immolation, and collapse from within. This is the true asymmetrical masterstroke, not battlefield victory, but systemic implosion through infiltration and entropic stress. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's how the war is most likely going to turn out. And what we can see from the remote viewing results that have come across in many of the deep news projects, as well as some of the mysteries projects that have specifically targeted Iran and the Middle East, this type of future is very possible. Now, it doesn't mean that it's absolute just because we've seen it with remote viewing. But what you do with remote viewing results is you say, this is some information that we have gotten. Is it plausible? Is it possible? And then you say, what kind of conditions would have to occur for these types of results to be valid, to actually happen? And that forces you to say, well, it would have to require XYZ. And what this talk that I've just given you today is the XYZ. So many people would say, Courtney, you've got remote viewing results that really seem very disruptive to the United States. How could that possibly be? Well, that's what this talk is about. This is how this type of thing could possibly be. Now, I have not talked about the European theater where we have the Russian and Ukraine war. That's not over and is likely going to be kicking up much stronger. And it's very possible that Western Europe is going to be involved in that, and it will see some evidence of the warfare hitting Western Europe. That's what we're talking about with regard to World War III. We're talking about the idea that the whole system basically comes apart. Now, timing. Timing's always difficult with remote viewing because time is just a measure, an abstract number that we use to organize the sequences of events. But when you do remote viewing, you're not dealing with an abstract number, you're dealing with events. So you can have an intent of saying what's going to happen in the current situation. And we can say, okay, within the time period of, say, April to December 2025. That doesn't mean that remote viewing is going to be absolutely limited to that segment of time from April to December 2025. Some of the stuff could happen in 2026 because we're going after the intent. By putting a date on the remote viewing stuff, what it says is you're shifting the intent to the near future, the stuff that's related to the evolution of war and political and global tensions as they exist now into the near future, say, for the rest of the year, maybe a little bit beyond. So it does say we're not talking about 10 years into the future. We're talking about the near-term future. But a lot of times people look at the dates that we have in our targets and say, okay, well, this is the day you said it was going to happen, and it didn't happen on by this exact day, so you're all a bunch of garbage. You don't understand how remote viewing works. The dates are guidelines to give you a way to look at the intention of the remote viewers. What area of time are we looking at? They're not hard things. So if some of this stuff doesn't happen until 2026, it's still within the time frame of the intent of the sessions. But many of our sessions are bookended with, in early 2025 to December 2025. Again, those are the intents, to say the intent of the evolution of global tensions in this time period as it is evolving now. All right, everybody, that's what I wanted to talk with you about. Again, you're going to be able to use the Farsight Vault, which we are going to be releasing to you very soon, in about a week. It's almost done. You have no idea how much work this has taken for us to get it together. And the Vault is written for a human can read it. It's just a TXT or a text format, but it's so big that it's not going to be very useful for a human to read. It's really designed for an AI to read. And since so many people are using AIs and you like to work with AIs with prompts, it's going to be perfect, because you can just simply upload the text file and then say, and now I want to ask questions about the future, about war with Iran. I want to ask questions about the Middle East. I want to ask questions about the war in the solar system, when there was a giant war that blew up Maldek, the planet that used to be between Mars and Jupiter. I want to know about the bad ETs, the good ETs. I want to know about the reptilians. I want to know about anything dealing with something in this solar system on the planet Earth, the extinction of the dinosaurs. You want to anything at all you want to ask about, you just write a prompt. You just write a question, ask it to your AI, and then the AI will scan the entire library, and you can have a discussion. And then the AI can give you recommendations for which videos to watch on FarsightPrime.com, so you can see the graphics and how everything is sort of spelled out with all of the emotions that the viewers had when they looked at all of that stuff. It's going to be great, really great. And it's all brought to you right here at Farsight. All right, everybody. So I will see you again next week. And again, we're putting these spotlights up these days as premieres on YouTube and FarsightPrime.com rather than live streams, so that we have a little bit more structure into what goes into them. So if you do a live stream, you're sort of, shooting at the hip. And if you do it with, a pre-set up video that you release on a certain date, you have the ability to sort of build greater content into it. So that's what we're trying right now. So, but it'll still be 7 o'clock Eastern Time, U.S. Eastern Time on Sunday, that the Farsight Spotlights are released. All right, everybody. And I'll see you next week. All right? And that'll be the first Spotlight in July. Can you believe it? Time is going. All right, everybody. Take care.